Chapter 11. The unexpected arrival of Slogan's vessel Wolfang made life even more unpleasant on Scoundrel. The crowded living conditions were now worse than ever, with two crews crammed into the space designed for one, and with the crowding came Fighting. Canadians weren't used to long hours of inactivity, so they filled their time with drinking and gambling, an almost certain recipe for trouble. When the members of one crew were involved, the disagreement that arose were usually settled quickly and forgotten, but the separate loyalties of the two crews inflamed the situation, so the arguments flared, tempers were lost, and at times weapons were drawn before Eric could intervene. It was noticeable, Will thought, that Slager never raised his voice to quell the fights. The more he saw of Wolf Fang's captain, the more he realized that the men had little real authority and commanded minimal respect from the other Canadians. Even his own crew worked for pay, not out of any sense of loyalty. The work for Will and Evelyn doubled, of course. There was twice as much cooking, serving, and cleaning to be done now, and twice as many Canadians to demand that they take care of any or other job that they needed doing. But at least they had retained their living space. The lean-to was too cramped for any of the massive Canadians to even consider co-opting it for their own use. That was one compensation for having been captured by giants, Will thought, but it was more than just the fighting and the extra work that had made life miserable for Will and Evelyn. The news of mysterious Valsvold taken by Ragnak had been devastating for the prisoners. Her life was now at risk, and the slightest mistake, the slightest incautious word from either of them could mean her death. She pleaded with Will to be careful, to continue to treat her as equal, as he always had before she told him that her real identity, the least sign of difference on his part, the smallest gesture of respect, might well raise suspicion and spell the end for her. Naturally, Will assured her that he would guard her secret. He schooled himself never to think of her as Cassandra, but always to use the name Evelyn, even in his thoughts. But the more he tried to avoid the name, the more it seemed to want to spring unbidden to his tongue. He lived in constant fear that he would inadvertently betray her. The bad feeling between them, born out of boredom and frustration as much as anything, had melted away in the face of this new and very real danger. They were allies and friends again, and their resolve to help and support each other regarding the strength and conviction that they had enjoyed in their brief time in Celtica. Of course, Evelyn's plan for ransom was now totally destroyed. She could hardly reveal herself to a man who had sworn to kill every member of her family. That realization, coupled with her own natural resentment at being forced to do manual, unpleasant work, made her life on Scoundrel miserable. The one bright spot in her life was Will, always cheerful, always optimistic, always encouraging. She noticed how he obtrusively took the worst, messiest jobs for himself whenever possible, and she was grateful for it. Thinking back to the way she had treated him a few days earlier, she felt ashamed. But when she tried to apologize and was straightforward enough to admit that she had been in the wrong, he dismissed it with a laugh. "We're all a little cabin crazy," he said. "The sooner we get away, the better." He still planned to escape, and she realized she must accompany him. She knew he had something in his mind, but he was still working on his plans, and so far he hadn't told her the details. For now the evening meal was over, and there was a massive sack full of wooden platters, spoons, and mugs to clean in the sea water, and fine gravel at the water's edge. Sighing, she bent to pick them up. She was exhausted, and the thought of crouching ankle-deep in the cold water while she scrubbed at the grease was almost too much to bear. "I'll do those," Will said quietly. He glanced around to make sure none of the Canadians were watching, then took the heavy sack from her. "No," she protested. It's not fair." But he held up a hand to stop her. "There's something I want to check anyway. This will be good cover," he said. "Besides, you've heard bad couple of days. Go and get some rest, he grinned. If I make you feel any better, there'll be plenty of washing up to do tomorrow, and the next day you can do it while I skiff off. She gave him a tired smile and touched his hand in gratitude. The thought of just stretching out on her hard bunk and doing nothing was almost too good to be true. Thanks, she said simply. His grin widened, and she knew he was genuinely glad that relations between them were back to normal. At least our hosts are enthusiastic eaters, he said cheerfully. They don't leave too much on the plates. He slung the sack and its clattering contents over his shoulder and headed for the beach. Smiling to herself, Evelyn stooped and entered the lean-to. Jarl Eric emerged from the noisy, smoke-filled mess hut and took a deep breath of the cold sea air. Life on the island was getting him down, particularly with Slager not pulling his weight in managing and maintaining discipline. The man was a useless drunk, Eric thought angrily, and he was no warrior. It was common knowledge that he selected only light defended targets for his raids and never took part in the fighting. Eric had just been forced to intervene between one of his own men and one of Wolfang's crew of criminals. Slager's men had been using a set of loaded dice, and when challenged, he had drawn his sax knife on the other Scandinavian. Eric had stepped in and knocked the Wolfang crewman senseless with one massive fist. Then, in order to show an even-handed approach, he was forced to knock his own man out as well. Even-handedness, Scandinavian style, he thought wearily. A left hook and a right cross. He heard the scrunch of feet in the gravel of the beach and looked up to see a dark figure heading towards the water's edge. He frowned thoughtfully. It was the Erlen boy. Stealthily, he began to follow the boy. He heard the clatter of plates, mugs, and being spilled on the beach, then the sound of scrubbing. Maybe he was just doing the washing up, he thought. Maybe not. Stepping carefully, Carefully, he worked his way a little closer. Eric's concept of stealth didn't quite match Ranger's standards. Will was scrubbing the platters when he heard the massively built Scandinavian approaching. Either that, he thought, or a walrus was beaching itself on the shingle. Turning to look up, he recognized the bulky form of Eric, made even larger in the darkness by the bearskin cloak he wore against the biting cold of the wind. Uncertainly, Will began to rise from his crouched position, but the Jarl waved him back. Keep on with your work, he said gruffly. Will continued to scrub, watching the Scandinavian leader out of the corner of his eye as he gazed across the anchorage and sniffed at the storm-born air. Stinks in there, Eric muttered finally. Too many people in too small a space, Will ventured, eyes down and scrubbing at the plate. Eric interested in him. He was a hard man and a pitiless fighter, but he was not actually cruel. Sometimes, in a gruff way, he could seem almost friendly. Eric in turn studied Will. What was he up to? He was probably trying to figure out a way to escape, Eric thought. That's what he'd be doing in the boy's place. The apprentice ranger was smart and resourceful. He was also determined. Eric had seen the way he stuck to his grueling exercise program, out running on the beach in fair weather or foul. Once again, he felt that sense of regard for the apprentice ranger and the girl. She had shown plenty of grit too. The thought of the girl made him frown. Sooner or later there'd be trouble in that quarter, particularly with Slager and his men. The crew of Wolfang were a sorry lot. Jailbirds and minor criminals for the most part. Good crew wouldn't sign with Slager. Well, he thought philosophically, if it happened, he would have to bang a few heads together. He wasn't going to have his authority challenged by a rabble like Slager's men. The two slaves were Eric's property. They'd be his only profit from his disastrous trip to Ireland, and if anyone tried to damage either one, they'd answer to him, as he had the thought. He tried to tell himself that he was only protecting his investments, but he wasn't sure it was entirely true. Jarl Eric, the boy said in the darkness, uncertainty in his tone as he wondered whether he should ask questions of this Canadian leader. Eric grunted. The sound was non-committal, but Will took it as permission to continue. What was the Velasvel Jarl Slager spoke of? He asked, trying to sound casual. Eric frowned at the title. Slager's no Jarl, he corrected the boy. He's merely a skirl, a captain of a wolf ship. I'm sorry, Will said humbly. The last thing he wanted to do was make Eric angry. Obviously, by referring to Slager as his equal, Will had risked that. He hesitated, but Eric's annoyance seemed to have abated, so he asked again. And the Velasvel? He prompted. Eric bleached quietly and leaned to one side so he could scratch his backside. He was sure that Slager's crew had brought fleas with them into the hut. It was the one discomfort they had not had to bear so far, cold, damp, smoke, and smell, but now they could add fleas. He wished, not for the first time, that Slager's wolf ship had gone down in the gales on the storm-white sea. It's a vow, he said unhelpfully, that Ragnar took. Not that he had any cause to, he added. You don't provoke the Valors lightly, not if you have any sense. The Valors, Will asked. Who are they? Eric looked at the dark form crouched beneath him. He shook his head in wonderment. How ignorant these Owlans were. Never heard of the Valors. What do they teach you in that damp little island of yours? He asked. Will wisely said nothing in reply. There were a few moments' silence, then Eric continued. The Valors, boy, are the three gods of vengeance. They take the form of a shark, a bear, and a vulture. He paused to see if that had sunk in. Will felt that this time some comment was required. I see, he said uncertainly. Eric snorted in derision. I'm sure you don't. Nobody in their right mind ever wants to see the Valors. Nobody in their right mind ever chooses to swear to them either. Will thought about what this Canadian had said. So a Val's vow is a vow of vengeance then, he asked, and Eric nodded grimly. Total vengeance, he replied. It's when you hate so badly that you swear to be avenged not just upon the person who has wronged you, but on every member of his family as well. Every member, said Will. For a moment Eric wondered if there was something behind his line of questioning, but he couldn't see how information like this could help in an escape attempt, so he continued. Every last one, he told him. It's a death vow, of course, and it's unbreakable. Once it's made, if the person making the vow should ever recant, the Valors will take him and his own family instead of the original victims. They're not the sort of gods you really want any business with, believe me. Again, a small silence. Will wondered if he had continued enough with his questions and decided he could try for a little more leeway. Then, if you're so terrible, why would Ragnar... he began, but Eric cut him off. Because he's mad, he snapped. I told you, only a madman would swear to the Valors. Ragnar was never been too stable. Now the loss of his son has obviously tipped him over the edge. Eric made a gesture of disgust. He seemed to tire of the subject of Ragnar and the fearful Valors. Just be thankful you're not of Duncan's family, boy, or Ragnar's for that matter. He turned back to where the firelight showed through a dozen cracks and chinks in the hut walls, casting strange elongated patterns of light onto the wet shingle. Now get back to your work, he said angrily, and strode back towards the heat and smell of the hut. Will watched him, idly sluicing the last of the plates in the cold sea water. We really have to get out of here, he said softly to himself. Okay, well, thank you for listening to me read chapter 11. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 12, then please stay posted, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.